Mr. Angus, Mr. President, board members, and your CEO, Mr. Holzman, thank you so much for the invitation to speak before all of you today. I wanted to just briefly sort of gauge how many of you live in Southern California? Very good. All right, we'll vote for Felipe Fuentes. All right. I ask because oftentimes when people think of the city of Los Angeles, they don't really know where the city of Los Angeles is. In particular, the good people of Anaheim. They've got this team called the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. They're in Orange County. They're not in the county of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles is one of 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles. The county is 10 million people. The city of Los Angeles has about 4.5 million people. It is supervised by 3 citywide officials, a mayor, a city attorney, a controller, and 15 council members, such as myself. And we oversee about 300,000 people. Our city is populated by about 4.5 million people. It is a very big city, but it's not as big as people make it out to be. And I think in large part it's because we have the second largest media market in the country. We are the second largest city in the country, but a lot of folks sort of forget where the boundaries of Los Angeles are. And I mention that because so much happens in Los Angeles that we either get credit or blame for. And some of those things happen to be, these days, surrounded by the conversation of infrastructure. So I'm going to use the word infrastructure very, very loosely to help you understand a little bit about what it is that is happening and probably what needs to be happening in the city of Los Angeles. Now, I think countrywide, and certainly in the state of California, but in particular in the county of Los Angeles these days, you hear an awful lot about the crisis in homelessness. And I think the good news about the conversation, aside from sort of our moral obligation to try to figure out how to help those who are having trouble help themselves, the good news is that we're beginning to look at housing as infrastructure. And the reason that I say that's good news, we all know, many of us, that it's an element in a general plan in most of the cities, by law in all of the cities in the state of California. But more and more housing is really speaking to a lot of demands, separate and aside from the crisis that we're seeing with homelessness. So for better or for worse, cities like Los Angeles are talking about it as infrastructure. But the bad news, I think, about the conversation these days in terms of infrastructure, in particular housing, is that we are beginning to budget by consent decree. What I'm trying to say here is that for better or for worse, cities like Los Angeles are oftentimes losing in court, and as a result, we have to begin to budget based on a court order versus budgeting the way that we probably should. Now, I wanted to share with you the example of homelessness for a second, because I think it has been in the news an awful lot, and it really highlights some of the challenges. So in 2003, as a matter of example, the city of Los Angeles was sued in a case called the Jones case. And it basically said, and we lost to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the ACLU brought the lawsuit, but it basically said that the city of Los Angeles does not have the ability to enforce the public right-of-way, enforce against the public right-of-way use. So as a result, we had people essentially camping on sidewalks and areas that are public space. We don't have the ability to enforce against them to get them off of the street, irrespective of what it is that they're doing. So subsequent to that, we had to strike a new ordinance, strike an ordinance and create a new one on how it is that we enforce that. But one of the conditions of the settlement was that we have to build 1,250 housing units in the core of the city of Los Angeles. So that's not a bad settlement. So again, infrastructure here. People are beginning to realize this is where you all should be excited. We've got to build some solutions. Subsequently, there was another case right as we were nearing our completion of this new deadline of the 1,250 units and the new ordinance that told us how it is that we could enforce. Lo and behold, we get sued again in a case called the Lavon case, saying that how it is that we're enforcing now the public right-of-way, how it is that we're cleaning up encampments, is now under, basically, we're violating people's constitutional laws rights by seizing and searching their stuff and then disposing of it. Irrespective of what we think their materials are, now we've seized, searched, and destroyed personal belongings. And so guess what? We lost in court again. And it's the same people that keep suing us because they're, for better or for worse, making a statement about what it is that the county and the city and probably government in total should be doing. But the city of Los Angeles, because we are the second largest city, becomes the poster child for what's going wrong on this issue. So we recently settled that case, and now we have this new rubric of how it is that we go about enforcing encampments. If it's attended or unattended makes a difference. We have to now tag an event, and then we have to store materials that we find for some amount of time. In addition to, we have to provide social service delivery, which I'm a huge supporter of. But the point is that as a result of these losses, we're beginning to have to take on some of the responsibility that truthfully falls on counties and the state. But in addition to that, it's pegging our budget a certain way now. And so that's just one example on how money is going to be spent soon. Let me give you another example that I think is a little bit more along the lines of infrastructure, the way we appreciate the word. In August of 2010, the city of Los Angeles got sued once again about the public right-of-way, because there are many areas in the city of Los Angeles that don't have level sidewalks or ramps for those folks with disabilities. That case is called the Willits case. And as a result, we were in court for an awful lot of time, but we just settled that litigation in December of this past year. The settlement includes a $1.4 billion obligation over 30 years to maintain the public right-of-way, the same sidewalks that we're having challenges in getting by. Now we've got to go ahead and fix those. We are going to be paying, at least in the initial years, about $35 million on an annual basis. It escalates all the way up to about $65 million at the tail end of the 30-year settlement period to adjust for inflation. So the good news is that there's a lot of work in the sidewalk business soon in the city of Los Angeles. The bad news is that the discretion that we have in how it is that we manage that work is now being dictated by a court. Now, the city of Los Angeles and other municipalities aren't clean here. We should have probably kept up our obligations on a lot of this. But my point here is that more and more you're seeing that our municipal treasury, at least in the city of Los Angeles, is now being dealt with by courts. So it begs a couple of questions. What is it that policymakers such as myself intend to do about that, and how do we become more effective with the investment that the taxpayer makes in its local government? So amongst the things that we've been talking about in Los Angeles along the lines of infrastructure is that we also have about 8,400 center lane miles in the city of Los Angeles that are just absolutely terrible. We have very, very bad streets in the city, and we need some 2,400 on an expedited basis, 2,400 miles to be remediated very quickly. And so as a result, what good, I think, policymakers do, or bad ones, depending on what your flavor is of policymakers, is we start thinking about where it is that we can get the money for those types of fixes. So recently there was an argument for a half-cent sales tax for the city of Los Angeles to go ahead and find additional revenue so that we can fix these streets. Now, the measure eventually died under its own weight. A lot of my colleagues could not see themselves, and I was one of them, putting a half-cent sales tax on the ballot because it was very myopic in its view on how it is that we were going to fix streets. It just looked at reconstruction, and that was it. It didn't look at lot-to-lot line, how it is that we would fix the infrastructure. Despite the fact that it didn't get on the ballot, there was tremendous support in the public. It was reported that over 65% of the city residents in Los Angeles were willing to tax themselves. 59% of the residents in the entire county of Los Angeles, even though they weren't in our city, thought it was a good idea. It all begs, I think, the question of how it is that you're going to fund these vital infrastructure improvements, especially since we know that there are declining inputs. We're not getting, as you all very well know, the money that we deserve to be getting at the local level from the state, largely because there isn't the will these days to deal with transportation. In fact, you've all read in the Times and know better than most people that over $754 million is going to get cut this year if we don't find a fix to the way that we deal with transportation taxes in the state of California. So we're getting less from the state level. We all know that we get very little to nothing from the federal level. And so we're all beginning to beg a lot of questions, how it is that we're going to maintain the infrastructure that the public depends on. Now, the one that seems to be getting a lot of traction, rightfully, is they're calling it the son or daughter of Measure R. You all may remember that the County of Los Angeles had passed and currently enjoys a half-cent sales tax for transportation. Now, that's all very good news, except that just this week in the Los Angeles Times, it was reported that ridership in the system has declined over the last 30 years. Despite the infusion of cash and systems and everything that we've added to the system, it is in decline. So it makes it so that we need to figure out how it is that we change the narrative about what it is that we're planning for. We need to continue to plan and build out these systems for obvious reasons, but the political arguments today aren't supporting some of the investment. And no matter what the story is in Los Angeles, it always points to this deferred maintenance that needs to be remediated. I happen to represent the Northeast San Fernando Valley. I have at the very top of my district the inlets for the Los Angeles Aqueduct and the State Water Project. Just 2 days ago, I was leading a tour with a bunch of NGOs and the county looking at our infrastructure and how it is that we can become more resilient, essentially build up the infrastructure so that we can capture stormwater when we have those events. Fascinating stuff for all of you who are in that area, because our flood control system in the county, designed 80 years ago, is working with 40% more drain on, pardon the pun, drain on the system, and it's doing it in a very efficient way, largely because there was the vision to think ahead and build out those systems. Well, we need the support today to understand what it is to build forward and think ahead. And when I was asked to speak here today, I realized that what's benefited me in understanding how we do these sort of things is the conversations that we have with associations like yours. The expertise that you have helps us inform policy, and I'll give you one last example. So last June, I introduced some legislation because at the time we thought that we would be passing this half-cent sales tax to deal with streets. We also thought that the way that streets were being done, at least I thought, weren't necessarily the most coordinated or the most efficient way. So I came up with some policy that is going to be literally just released in the next couple of weeks in a formal sense. It's already been adopted by the council, the ordinance has been passed, and the punch list for the Bureau of Engineering, the Department of Sanitation, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and Street Services Department, it's all been adopted. But it makes it so that any time in the city of Los Angeles a shovel touches dirt, the respective departments have to come together and study the impact of that. Now, you would think that's sort of a no-brainer, but when we think about budgets, the Street Services Department has a certain amount of budget and work. The sidewalks folks have some, the tree people, the street tree people do, the Department of Water and Power, the Department of Sanitation. There is coordination, but there isn't the long view about the investment in the system. And let me tell you what it is that I'd like to see happen. So anytime a shovel touches dirt, we should do the analysis if there's water there, because we've got a couple of other liabilities outstanding in the city of Los Angeles. MS4 compliance and TMDLs, we have 22 total maximum daily load areas in the city of Los Angeles that we have to mitigate. It's federal and state mandate. We have an MS4 permit that we have to renew and be in compliance with. It's estimated that if we were just to address those issues by themselves, it would cost us about $800 million. Now, I thought to myself, if we're going to go and fix a street, should we not do the analysis and understand what the watershed looks like? Is there an MS4 issue here? If there is, then let's go ahead and figure out how to treat and discharge the water flow. If there isn't, is there an opportunity for infiltration so that we can go ahead and store and capture? The city of Los Angeles enjoys real opportunities there. The San Fernando Basin, as a matter of example, can hold 600,000 acre feet, which is equivalent to 1 year's supply of water for the entire city of Los Angeles. So from a ratepayer perspective, when you think about the $1,100 it costs to buy water from Metropolitan Water District, or the $340 it takes to pump up and use, all of a sudden, it makes an awful lot of sense to not just build the cheapest sort of opportunity, but spend more so we maximize the opportunity. And so beginning in the next couple of weeks to months, this policy will now be what it is that every city department has to do when it touches dirt. But I would not have known that if I had not spent time with folks like you, understanding what best management practices are and what multiple solution benefit looks like. And so as a result, this policy is going to be enacted. So for that, I want to thank you. But my point that I would like to end with is that we need your advocacy, and more importantly, we probably need to elect some contractors into public office. But what we need to do is really educate policymakers at every single level. The folks that we have in the city of Los Angeles are professional, they understand these issues, but what we don't have, I think, is the unbundling of money to allow budgets to maximize the investment and build up the infrastructure like I know you all understand we should. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you for your time.